Welcome to the JCPS series on elementary school multi-tiered systems of support for behavior. This module is focused on the concept and process of screening, and we'll see how the school-wide behavior team uses information from behavior screeners. In later modules, we'll discuss the steps teams take once students have been identified, the essential components of effective interventions, and formative assessment. Screeners are assessments that look broadly across all students to identify those who are at a greater risk of falling behind their peers and who need additional supports to be successful. Screeners generally identify students as low risk, moderate risk, or high risk. This indicates the level of concern or severity of the risk of the student falling behind their peers. One common criticism of screening is an opposition to labeling students as at risk. Some have suggested that at risk is another way of creating disproportionality. However, it is important to note here that the term at risk does not mean that there is necessarily anything wrong with the student. Rather, it is meant only to designate that the circumstances surrounding the student, things like assessment scores, teacher reports, or other data and information, create a concern for potential failure. But identifying students whose circumstances put them at risk is necessary in order to look deeper at what the issues may be and how we may intervene. For example, the data is clear that Black male students are suspended far more often than their white peers, even though direct observations have demonstrated that their behaviors are no different. This means that the school environment, as it has been structured, puts Black males at risk of suspension. Our job as educators is to mitigate the risks and put structures in place to support students and their families, no matter their race, no matter their circumstances. Another common concern with universal screening, which refers to our plans to screen every student in the school, is that it can feel like it is too burdensome. There's no way to get around the fact that screening takes time, but there is a cost-benefit consideration here. The time and effort it takes to screen pales in comparison to the time and heartache that can be prevented through proactive intervention. Because we wish to screen every student in the school, our screening methods and processes must be simple. Of course, with simplicity, we lose some precision, but the ability to get some basic measures on every student is our priority. Fortunately, JCPS screeners have been nationally normed, providing useful information from fairly simple assessments. In JCPS, behavior screening is done using the Student Risk Screening Scale, or SRSS. The SRSS is completed by all teachers for every student in their charge. Student behaviors are rated for frequency on a 4-point scale across 12 behavioral descriptors, including externalizing behaviors such as peer rejection and internalizing behaviors like nervous or fearful. The school-wide behavior team identifies students using cut scores, meaning that students scoring above a certain level are deemed to be at low, moderate, or high risk. Because the SRSS is based on national norms, the cut scores can change year to year, and you'll need to consult the current SRSS information. Like the SRSS, the SABRS is completed by all teachers in the school. Using a 4-point scale on 19 items, teachers rate the frequency from never to always of each student's behavior, but just focusing on the last month. Importantly, teachers are not to be provided with definitions of the listed behaviors. Thus, with terms like temper outburst, teachers are asked to use their best judgment in considering what actions are representative of each behavior. The idea behind this is that teachers should be considering their interpretations of student misbehavior rather than trying to determine whether what they've observed fits some specific definition. The SABRS provides 4 subscales of risk for a total behavior risk score, as well as subscales for social, academic, and emotional risk. As with the SRSS, the SABRS cut scores are based on national norms, which can change over time, so you'll need to consult the current SABRS information. While the SRSS and SABRS are useful in identifying behavioral and social-emotional risk, this data alone should only be considered the first level of screening. Using a prevention logic, false positives are preferable to false negatives, and many of the students identified at this level will not require further intervention. To make this determination, however, these students will require further attention and assessment, as will be described in Module 3 of this series. Universal screening is just one of the tasks undertaken by the team. JCPS school-wide behavior teams meet regularly and typically look at their screening data at least 3 times per year. The logic and administration of screeners is fairly simple and straightforward, and while these processes involve the entire school, they are often overseen by the behavior team. Once the screening is completed, the team meets to discuss the results. We can think of this as a second level of universal screening, where team members look at data and discuss individual students. This is an elementary school-wide behavior team. As you're introduced to the team members and their discussions, you'll notice that they are not all experts in screening and assessment. Rather, the team is composed of individuals that broadly represent all adults in the school: an administrator, a behavior coach, grade-level representation of teachers, a counselor, a school psychologist, a mental health professional, and any others who can offer broad perspectives about students identified as at risk. Other individuals may be consulted as appropriate to discuss individual students, even possibly the child's guardian. Each school-wide behavior team has a designated lead whose job it is to lead the meetings according to an agenda and make sure that all necessary tasks have been completed. While there is not a mandated agenda or form for schools to use in discussing universal screening, it is recommended that the following general steps be used to structure meetings that involve universal screening. Remind everyone of the decision rules for the screener. Call attention to data and cut scores or risk level. Sort and filter data to highlight cut scores or risk level. This can usually be done on a computer for all to see. Highlight students identified as surpassing cut score or risk level. Solicit additional information among team members regarding identified students. See if someone has more specific knowledge. And discuss each of these students individually. This will be the topic of Module 3.
Okay, let's get started. Thank you all for being here today. Today we're going to take a look at the SRSS data.
So when we look at the data, are we looking at all of it, or are we just looking at individuals who have been identified by the screener?
We're going to take a look at the data together and sort through it, all of it.
Okay, good.
So thinking through our task logically, I think the first step is to pull up the SRSS data. So if you want to get out your computers and pull up that SRSS screening data so we can take a look at it. So in truth, I'd already looked at all the screener data ahead of time, but I wanted to do that with my team so they could kind of see how it works and know the process. And I know sometimes there is bias. People might think there's bias involved, so we do it together.
Watch how each team member has the opportunity to express their thoughts on each case.
It feels like we're putting a lot of stock into the ratings of one person. What if they're wrong?
Yeah, I thought the same thing, but there's 2 things that kind of really occurred to me. First, while it is just one person, this is the person who's seeing that student all day, every day. That's true. And secondly, this is just information for us to consider. This really isn't the final say.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. This screening is just for us to take a deeper look at the students.
I do have a related question though. It looks like there are a lot of students that are right near that cut score. Should we be concerned with them even though they didn't meet that specific criteria?
So, it's my understanding that the cut scores have been set in such a way that we're more likely to find false positives than false negatives. Because we'd rather find students that don't actually need the help than to ignore students that really do need it.
That's a good point.
Right, so we can identify a student even if he or she does not meet that cut score, and we can take additional behavior data, attendance, into consideration.
Okay,
Absolutely.
that's a good point.
Yeah, I would say that my biggest concern was that we have so many students that need so much help, and I was worried that we weren't going to be able to help all those students. So it was really comforting to know that the SRSS is really designed to help those students and identify them.
I want to make sure also that we're not letting one set of data dictate what we're doing for students. And once I really understood that we're not just looking at assessment, we're taking a deeper dive in, and that kind of leads us to those discussions, it really helps me understand that we're not letting that one set of data dictate what we're doing.
The team lead keeps the discussion on topic, but there should be equal input from all team members. Watch how interactive this process can be when done correctly.
All right, so looking at the cut scores and looking at the students, I noticed one of the students we may need to take a deeper dive into and look at was Jordan. She seemed to come up as seeing some high scores, some things we may need to dive into. So I didn't know if we wanted to open the conversation and talk about any issues we know, any things going on in the classroom, maybe some absenteeism, looking at some of her data. I did notice that she is coming in a little late. So I really wanted to focus in on that because that late start could really affect that schedule. Have you guys noticed anything
So
else?
I have a question first. So since you're noticing some things, I'm guessing that her externalizing score is what's high. Is she
Yes.
also has a high internalizing, or are we just looking at externalizing?
External at this moment.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, something could be going on at home, or I do know that there is a sub in that class right now. That teacher is currently on maternity leave, so maybe she doesn't do well with a sub, or something, there, there's not as much structure
Right.
as there once was.
I do know Tier 1, we've really been trying to put support in that classroom because Tier 1 strategies aren't really strong right now, so
Okay.
that could be.
I wonder too if there's conflict with a specific student or a group of students, if that's affecting, hey, I don't want to go to school, so maybe parents are having a hard time even getting her to school.
Exactly.
Well, her parents did say that that is difficult now. Like, she doesn't want to get up, she doesn't want to get ready, and normally she will get ready for school, but she's kind of fighting them on that too. So that is something that we probably want to look at.
Yeah.
So it's
While
on
I
that
don't
home.
teach her, she's tabbed out to my class quite a few times just to de-escalate and calm down. So, she might be one we really want to take a deeper look at.
Maybe even make the recommendation to the team that they spend some time looking at as well.
So going back to that with the Tier 1, I wonder if we need to go back into the classroom, really tie up some of those Tier 1 interventions, especially hearing that she has a sub. So knowing
Providing some
that,
additional supports to that sub
exactly.
could be helpful, and
I think so.
Okay, that sounds like a good plan. We'll do that. Looking at the data also, I noticed Conrad, he is scored moderate, which has been a change. So do you all know anything, Conrad, 3rd grade, that could be going on with him?
I remembered that his teacher was saying that those transitions were difficult, but when I looked back at his absenteeism, it seems like he's here a lot of the days and not absent a lot.
yeah, and I noticed a lot of them kind of spiked right before winter break. And so I'll be interested to see like if that same thing happens right before spring break. Maybe he has trouble since he does love coming to school, it sounds
Yes.
like, that when he knows a break is coming, that he starts having escalating behaviors.
And that could be because his referrals have actually gone up. So,
And it has been a teacher in there all year. I didn't know if
Same teacher.
anybody has been in there to look at Tier 1 interventions. How are those going?
Tier 1's pretty strong in that classroom. That
Okay.
teacher, yes,
Yeah.
that's pretty
So
good.
something maybe deeper going on with Conrad about those
Yeah.
It
breaks.
could be
Yes.
something at home that's causing him to spike every time he has a break.
I
Yeah.
agree.
I think
If
we might
school
need to
provides
look for
structure
those.
for him, and he
Yep.
knows he's not about to have school for a lengthy time, may start acting out.
We need to watch those trends. I do agree with you, though, that transitions are a struggle. Every time I see him in the hallway, he does really
Yes.
seem to struggle with those. And he also seems to struggle a little bit with transitions in the classroom, but the teacher does such a great job at
Yes.
walking through those that it's not as big of an issue.
That's great to hear.
So it definitely sounds like we need to refer Conrad to the SIT team to talk about further interventions that might work for him.
I agree. with
I
that.
agree,
Yeah.
especially since we see those Tier 1 interventions really strong within that room.
Yes,
He's
and a good
candidate.
relationship
Yeah.
with the teachers.
Yeah, and I want
I
to make sure
agree.
the teacher's involved in some of that too, since she has a good relationship.
Okay.
All right, I like it.
All right, sounds like a plan.
I really want to make sure that, but before we even go into Tier 2 and 3, we want to make sure that Tier 1 is tight, that we're really running that to fidelity. And I think we sometimes skip over that, or we don't really look at that fidelity. We make sure it's happening. And so we have to make sure that we're putting those Tier 1 interventions in place, because do we even know that they're effective if we haven't came back and done fidelity checks? We haven't made sure that we're really running those Tier 1 supports to fidelity with everyone that is involved with these students.
When we think about MTSS, we want to make sure that we're focusing on the whole child. So that's really talking about those externalizing factors that we may see, something that goes on at the home, something maybe that happened that morning, so that we can really focus on why those behaviors are occurring in the classroom.
To recap, universal screening for behavior involves gathering information from adults in the school to help identify those students who may be at risk. The only purpose of screening is to identify students who may benefit from additional support. It is not meant to stigmatize anyone, and no labeling is involved. But the school-wide behavior team has to identify concerns in order to address them, and screening is a first step. Once students are identified through screeners or other data, further assessment and intervention are typically provided by secondary behavior teams.